so excited to talk about our next panel, which is on environmental well-being. And this is a really important conversation to have if we're talking about blockchain, right? No one here is disagreeing that blockchain is something we have to think about when it comes to climate change and when it comes to making a difference in the environment. And it also underpins everything we're doing. It's the prerequisite to having financial health, to having sustainable cultures and community. If we're not able to thrive in the environment we live in, it's kind of a non-starter. The moderator we have for this today is the wonderful Lauren Sirota. She is the director, or the design director and a co-founder of CRADL, and a brilliant product strategist. But when she's not doing amazing design research, she's also advising a company called Funga. And she's super smart on it, but my gist of it is that if you take technology and you add mushrooms, you have a better way to grow trees, which is a better way to capture carbon. If you're coming to our Aleo after party at 5 p.m., the best way to get Lauren to talk to you is to ask her about her mushrooms. But Lauren is so in touch with the importance of environmental well-being, and she's so personally invested in making a difference in this space. I'm so excited to hear the conversation she's going to have with our amazing panelists. Let's welcome Lauren to the stage.
Oh, I think I'm on. Hey, thanks. Specifically mycelium, okay? So if you want to talk about microdosing, we can do that too, but I'll know a little bit less. I just want to make sure everybody's clear. And so I've been paying attention to the climate space for quite some time, and I think a lot of people pay attention to the climate space and blockchain in terms of the environmental impact of mining. But really what we're here to talk about today is the significant potential of blockchain technologies to enable us to stay on the planet, to better monitor our air quality, to better provide access to water, so to actually make life much healthier and better for everybody on Earth. And so I'm really excited to welcome my panelists today, who are each going to talk about what they're doing in a completely different way. So come on up, y'all. We can introduce ourselves while you're sitting down. Can I get a round of applause for these folks? Okay, so I'd first like to introduce, it's like a surprise in terms of what order you're sitting in. Claudio Parrinello, who is a former research physicist, but does one ever stop becoming a research physicist?
I stopped at the turn of the last century, a long time ago.
I'm sure that you still have some of those tendencies, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and has worked, spent quite a bit of time at CERN, but is now the founder and CEO of PlanetWatch. Can you talk a little bit about PlanetWatch?
Sure. Okay, PlanetWatch, so the link with CERN, the logical link, the easiest one to explain, is related to the notion of citizen science. Citizen science was big at CERN at some point. It's the idea that unskilled, ordinary people can add real value to scientific projects. There have been lots of projects displaying this in the last 20 years. When I was at CERN, I realized it was a great idea, but there was something missing in the picture. We missed scalability, transparency, and global engagement. So at some point I felt that citizen science plus blockchain technology would do the trick. So the idea of PlanetWatch is citizen science applied to a huge environmental challenge, which is air quality monitoring worldwide. So the challenge is you need dense hyperlocal sensor networks anywhere in the world, especially in inner cities, and you need to be able to deploy in a fast and cost-effective manner. Solution: incentivize and engage local residents to help you deploy the network and generate the big data we need to monitor our environment. That's what
Thank you. Yeah, that's super important and a perfect segue actually to Sharlene. And Sharlene, by the way, is extremely brave because she is not coming from the Web3 world, but she's coming from a deep expertise in water access, watershed protection. So thank you for coming here and starting to imagine how Web3 technologies can actually impact the space. Can you talk a little bit about your organization and what you do?
Sure. So we launched Texas Water Trade. We're a 501c3 charitable organization working statewide since 2019 to try to solve the problem of having explosive population growth in a state that has declining water availability, and trying to meet the need of our human population over time, but also make sure that we don't strand the habitats and ecosystems that provide quality of life and life for all sorts of amazing wildlife that share the state with us. So really what we try to do is buy water and enable water through business however we can, whether that's buying water rights, much like you might buy land for protection of ecosystems, but also looking at the human dimension and realizing that there's no way to ever solve the problem. You'll never have enough money. There will never be enough water available to buy on the market. to solve the wildlife water problem if you don't change the way that people in Texas source their water. And so I'm really happy to be here learning about Web3 and thinking about what it means for the really innovative ways that we're trying to fundamentally shift from cities and growing populations being a demand for water to being a supply of water. And we can talk more about what that looks like.
Yeah, I've been learning some really mind-boggling stuff, like totally revolutionary stuff about air conditioning condensate, which we'll get to in a little bit if anybody gets really nerdy about kind of new sources of really valuable resources. Sharlene's got some cool information on that. John Ruth, who, by the way, the coolest stat, over your career, you've built over 400 megawatts of solar projects, which is just super cool. So experienced solar project developer, but now you founded Spark Eco, which is a DAO to provide access to renewable energy infrastructure, specifically solar. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, I'm building Spark Eco, and at the highest level, we realize that there's 1 billion people on Earth that don't have access to electricity. And so if we are going to provide 1 billion people with electricity at this point, we have to provide them with clean, renewable energy. And so at the highest level, we want to develop new systems of funding and financing solar so that we can bring solar energy to all of those people. Specifically, we are working on models to fund solar as well as looking at the renewable energy certificates, which are associated with renewables and solar energy, and trying to bring those on to the blockchain as a new money Lego so that we can develop new subsidies to make those projects happen.
I sense a theme of hyperlocal and accessible infrastructure happening at the citizen level, which I think is really, really important and powerful. And then finally, Gregory Landua, who is the founder of Regen Network and the ReFi movement, which I'm sure a lot of people in this room are familiar with, and if not, you should be. You should be paying attention to what's going on in this space, bringing carbon markets on chain, and resolving some of the kind of issues that exist in the legacy carbon market. Can you tell us a little bit about what Regen Network is doing?
Yeah, well, so what Regen Network is doing, I think actually kind of goes a little bit deeper than the carbon market as it currently exists. So what we're working on is building a public infrastructure for ecological data management, ecological claims management, and ecological asset issuance. And it just so happens that, if you're abstracting things down to that layer, carbon markets are the current place where society is placing value on, sort of a negative externality, positive externality process, and bringing the cost of carbon emissions onto corporate balance sheets and offsetting that with carbon credits, right? But fundamentally, if you take a step back, what we're really aiming to do is create sort of a community-owned, plausibly neutral system for originating these all-important ecological assets, these new, green money Legos, or however you want to speak about it. And I think we have a perspective that really needs its own sovereign, neutral, and community-owned space, that if you build that on other infrastructure, you're going to end up having incentives that start to sort of tweak the asset issuance in the financialization process and in the search for liquidity that actually undermine the integrity, which is the foundation for a regenerative finance movement. So at Regen Network, we're really aiming to build community around, and it's a heavy lift, but the process of originating high quality ecological assets and asking and answering the questions, how do we generate legitimacy in that process?
I get really excited about this because this is the platform that we will need to have biodiversity credits or have assign value to other things that we know are so integral to habitat and kind of life restoration or life sustainability on the planet. And right now, we're rebuilding a system every time we want to create a new cycle of value. And so building a platform for that to persist. Also, Gregory is a regenerative farmer, has written books that revolutionize kind of the regenerative space. So thank you for all of your work in that space to date. And I actually want to start with a question to you because you've talked about regeneration specifically, and I think you're creating an infrastructure for kind of any kind of natural asset product to come online, but regeneration for you is very local. So talk about that.
Yeah, so I sort of like to say, if we're going to create proof of regeneration, it is always going to be place specific and context specific. We may have these global, we have one atmosphere as a biosphere. So there is sort of a, atmospheric carbon is a global phenomena, but ecological regeneration is a local phenomena. Water quality is a local phenomena. Air quality is a local phenomena. There are point sources for the pollution, or there are, forests that are conserved that have specific biodiversity or specific soil types. And so really building out, and it's just resonant with a couple of panels ago, they were talking about hyperlocal, right? So, or just last panel, I guess. So that concept of really enabling the participation of a local community to be monitoring, right? To be defining what the unit of account is that represents what regeneration is really a reweaving of the cultural and the ecological to sort of create that unit, right? And so for us, that's really essential. If we get into these sort of totalizing protocols where we're aiming for standardized units and all of these things prematurely, we miss the need to be building sort of a grassroots process around generating legitimacy and impact and integrity. And so, everything, I think there's probably a common thread here, but everything we're aiming to do is to build the tools and the community to explore that sort of local regeneration, monitoring, measuring, and then being able to sort of verify that that's taking place.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There's actually some interesting tension, I think, to the standardization that is required for things like what Claudio is doing with PlanetWatch, right? That there obviously is some, and you've talked about this a bit, that there needs to be a very different way of doing scientific kind of rulemaking and figuring out what the standards are, and getting scientists to actually collaborate in a different way is in itself its own challenge.
Sort of a dichotomy, right? That we need to have, we think of it as sort of standards or schema registries and tools for calibration and things like that. So you do want people to generate consensus around the right way to calibrate an instrument or the right methodology to measure something, but you also need to have spaciousness for people to innovate on that and not sort of like bureaucratically smash that. And so I think that is a very interesting tension that we all live with.
And that's actually kind of at the core of a lot of what you're doing, Sharlene, and what your organization's doing with Vita Water, and this belief of kind of having distributed water purification and water sustainability. So can you talk a little bit about kind of how these localized systems can happen and what that allows people to do to manage these kind of potentially oppressive forces?
Yeah, sure. So even in a place like Texas, there are still just a tremendous number of people who live without basic water services. We don't really have good numbers here, I think partly because we intentionally don't count, but the state does count in 6 counties and has discovered about 140,000 Texans who have no water services whatsoever. That's 6 counties out of 254 counties. So this is really a pervasive problem, and it's a problem that doesn't just exist here in Texas. If you go to really any tribal nation, if you go to Appalachia, if you go to Central Valley in California, just here in the United States, not to speak of the broader world, you have many, many humans who have been left behind by the 20th century water supply solution, which is a centralized water utility that works really well. It helped us solve the problem that really rampaged so many cities in the 19th century, where you had people who would somewhat routinely die of cholera outbreaks. But it doesn't work when you have people who live in deeply rural places, who may live on land that is, they're not legally there. They've built a home, but it's not legally platted, and so a service will never be extended to them. And in those sorts of contexts, what we've seen emerging in decentralized water in the form of, a lot of the skyscrapers you see here in downtown Austin, which were built to intercept forms of water that are growing, forms of water like air conditioning condensate, right? We have more tonnage of air conditioning going on online every year here in real estate throughout Texas. You have more air conditioning days thanks to climate change. You have greater humidity. That's a growing supply wedge for water supply, one we often discount. And it's theoretically possible today, it's absolutely possible right now to capture that water and use it for all of your non-potable, non-drinking water purposes. I believe there's a future in which that water can be legally treated to be safely ingested as well, used for safe drinking water. That opportunity set is not going to just naturally come online for the people who are today are left behind by the 20th century model of a water utility and drinking water. And so that was really what we were pursuing when we formed our public benefit corporation, Vita Water, which is entering into a non-regulated space in the water world. We'll be providing point-of-use water treatment, basically under sink reverse osmosis or carbon filtration for even people who live in urban areas but who don't have safe water, maybe because of lead. And ultimately, we hope to become the first decentralized water utility in Texas, potentially in the United States, delivering that safe water and the security of knowing that there is someone who is consistently monitoring the quality of that water. But going from, in every city has 1 to 3 water treatment plants, and it's easy to have an operator pulling a water quality sample on the hour or every 24 hours, to suddenly having dozens or potentially hundreds of water systems in every home or building. That's a profound challenge, and one it's very interesting to think about what Web3 might mean for meeting the potential.
Yeah, and that's, actually, John, a lot of what you're thinking about, right? And so can you talk a little bit about why you think about Web3 or blockchain technology specifically as right when you're thinking about building a network of solar energy?
Yeah, thank you. I think at its root, one of the greatest powers of Web3 and cryptocurrency is a coordination mechanism. So I think it is a way that we can coordinate at the grassroots level in communities, both hyperlocal communities, but also globally, because it is, it's really a borderless technology. And so if we have this means of coordinating at a whole new level, that means that now we can develop new systems around that. In parallel, cryptocurrency allows us now to create our own money. That's the reality of it. We get to print our own money now, and if we get to print our own money, we get to start to look at how do we back that money? What does that programmable money really mean, and what is it really backed by? Do you want to use the US dollar that's backed by a big war machine, or do you want to use some cryptocurrency that's backed by carbon, that's backed by renewable energy? And so we can start to reimagine what money really means and what the root of it is. And so for me, there's this intersection of like our physical world and how do we start to use this new technology to further our physical world. So solar specifically, it's essential that we accelerate the deployment of solar worldwide. Clean energy is a huge part of the solution of climate change, and so if we can use this technology to create subsidies and to create a new way of financing, solar power, wind power moving forward, we can use it as a subsidy to really accelerate the deployment long-term of solar around the world and this transition to a clean energy future. So that's, I guess, how I see it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to think about, both the benefit of the communication of a network, right, and an agreement and how they're communicating instead of centralized protocols and then translation or not between centralized entities, and then also a new financial mechanism for development of this infrastructure. So it's cool that both of those things are super relevant in this space. Sharlene, you told me a stat that I actually want to have, I don't remember it, but it was something about how much, like you said that there was a building being built in town and they could be entirely self-sustainable off of their air conditioning condensate. Is that true?
Yeah, that's right. Unfortunately, that never came to pass, but for reasons that had to do with water regulation, and we really can't overlook that when we think about the power of the possible, that it also, when you're trying to provide fundamental services, you deal with an established regulatory framework that may dramatically inhibit and really requires champions who are going to incur the long hours and the costs to be able to transform the regulatory structure in which that potential can be realized. But that's right. We had a very large tech firm here in town that was building out part of a new building, and they were able to calculate that, yes, through the combined supplies of air conditioning, condensate, and rainwater capture but really air conditioning condensate being the thing that works day in, day out, they would be able to be entirely net zero off-grid water, which is profoundly interesting and important, underused, underappreciated. Again, we really exist within this world in which we frame the nature, we limit our ability to create solutions in the way that we frame the nature of the problem. We see cities as demands for water. We should look at every skyscraper, we should look at every data warehouse, we should look at every facility and see it as a built reservoir, as an atmospheric generating unit. I mean, that is what an air conditioning system is. We've got, X prizes for water, offering $1 million for the most economically feasible form of an atmospheric water generation unit. But the reality is that every single building in Texas has been built in the last 40 years, just happens to be generating water from the atmosphere and not doing it intentionally. It's just doing it because we're trying to, not be incredibly hot.
That's amazing, right? And that's I think it's so cool to think about assigning that a value as a different kind of natural asset, because it is. And it's crazy that in this time where we do need water, that we're letting regulation for good reasons, though, get in the way of us really valuing it and utilizing it and kind of appreciating construction in a completely different way. So I think that's so cool. Claudio, you are like in the thick of actually some of these kind of gnarly problems and thinking about how much administration that your organization wants to do of hardware. And specifically, you started out really as like a Web 2 or a more traditional company where you were managing all of the assets and all of the different sensors and the network. And now you're moving away from that. And can you talk about like why and what that enables, kind of that move towards decentralization?
Yes, thank you. So in my mindset, if you want to start a very innovative, disruptive project and you want to start it fast in the right way, you're kind of bound to start Web 2. I mean, you need leadership, you need financial resources, you need a structure. So kind of start Web 2. What happened to us, we did start Web 2, we set up a company, we funded it the traditional way, we started selling products and services the traditional way, issuing the bills, refund policy, and blah, blah, blah. The thing that was decentralized in Web3 from the start was the network deployment activity, because the core idea was to incentivize community-based deployment of hardware, sensors. So from day one, we had communities deploying sensors, which was great. Now we're going to reach the next level of decentralization, which is crucial, because the whole point of the exercise is to get green data, we call it, so environmentally relevant big data, exploit them, extract value from them, scientific and business value. And what we're going to do next, which is delivering APIs, which would enable essentially anybody to leverage our data, from the likes of Google all the way down to local consulting firms and service providers to local government. That is a big step for us. Everybody has equal rights to access and use this data. And I would call it decentralizing business development if you want to think Web 2. I mean, in a Web 2 world, we as a company will set up subsidiaries in all countries in the world, hire staff to go and knock doors, which is crazy, non-scalable, non-transparent, and non-Web 3. While if you build a valuable asset, you say this belongs to the community, anybody can access the asset on equal grounds, then everybody can be, well, every qualified person and entity can be a business developer, and everything is frictionless and valuable. So that we're going towards a direction where all the key processes will be managed by smart contracts, which means you very transparently, you contribute to the project, you use our utility token to gain access to resources, and then you leverage them in any creative way you can think of.
I think what's so cool is that I remember when APIs first became products that were important for organizations to develop, and I think that this was the hope, was that anybody could build on them, but there was always still a centralization of decision making and a centralization of the kind of benefits of anybody accessing those APIs. But the fact that the payment for access to those will in fact go to the infrastructure which is distributed is just so fundamentally different. And I think that that's, it's truly almost a marriage of the best of Web 2 and the best of Web 3, or one of the best ones that I've seen. So I think that that's a very cool, like the business models worked well together in this particular instance. And I'm sure that it's a lot bumpier. There's probably a lot of
It is bumpy, but if you allow me to, we are trying to strike a balance between two conflicting things, which is on one hand having a grassroots citizen science project, on the other hand having science-grade data, and that's really a bit of a challenge. And on the other hand, to have a Web3 access to data and to achieve also business goals, Web3 business goals, because a large fraction of the revenues are redistributed to the community. So trying to put the best of Web 2 and Web 3 together in a way.
That's fantastic. And I wish we had like 2 hours, honestly, with this group, selfishly. But thank you all so much for this brief time we had together. I'm so happy you all know each other now. Also, I think that that's really important. I have one last question that I'm going to ask everybody to answer as quickly as possible. If you could summarize this particular moment in time for the environment from your perspective. Gregory, I'll start with you.
We are nature healing herself.
Nice, thank you. John?
If it's just one word, I think I'd say hopeful. And I hope we're moving towards abundance.
So optimistic. Thanks, you both.
The world at this point, no part of the world is untouched by man. We live within an engineered world. Our solutions are inevitably going to be engineered, but if we have the ability to look at what we can design to mimic nature, I think that is a fundamental part of how we solve the resource equity gap for human beings while also being able to live in a way that is sustainable.
Claudio?
We all have to fight for a healthy environment, which is not just about equality, it includes a peaceful environment, because war is the greatest pollutant of all. You can die on the spot, and you can die out of cholera, you can die out of lack of drinkable water. So living a life means living in a peaceful, clean, and respectful environment.
Okay, so regenerative not just for the planet, but also for us socially. Thanks y'all so much.